Hey, Senior High, welcome back. I hope you guys had a great Easter break. Welcome back. We're starting a brand new series called Waitlisted. And I'm going to start off by asking you a question. Have you ever heard of the Stanford marshmallow experiment? Yeah, it's an experiment from the 1970s that studied delayed gratification. So here's how it worked. A kid was given a marshmallow. They were told that they could eat the marshmallow, but if they waited and didn't eat the marshmallow immediately, they could have 2 marshmallows later. Now, the kids in the experiment were then tracked over the course of years to see what kinds of decisions they made as they got older. Now, the goal was to see if kids who waited for the second marshmallow, if they had better lives and made better decisions than the kids who, well, couldn't wait. You see, the experiment had mixed results, and its conclusions are pretty hotly debated, but it's so well known that it's often remixed and parodied. Here's a clip from Magic for Humans featuring a variation of the Stanford marshmallow experiment.
The famous Stanford marshmallow experiment tests children's self-control.
You have a choice. You can eat it now, totally cool, or if you can wait till I get back, I'll give you a second marshmallow.
I can do it.
You can wait 10 minutes? Okay. Oh, by the way, if you want, you can use that cup to cover it up so you don't have to look at it. Good luck.
Okay.
Researchers showed that by putting a marshmallow in front of a kid and daring him not to eat it, you could tell if one day they'd be the next Steve Jobs or the next Steve Gutenberg. Now, in the original experiment, they just waited to see what happened, but I don't have the patience for that.
This is painful to watch. All right. Oh, you ate it. That's okay.
I didn't eat it. I lifted the cup and it was gone.
How'd you do?
Good.
Was it good?
Yeah. After I slipped the cup, it just disappeared.
What disappeared?
The marshmallow.
Would you like another one?
Yeah, it just disappeared.
Oh, buddy, here. You want to eat this one? It's okay. Here, eat this one. You can eat this one. It disappeared like magic?
Yeah.
Well, eat this one. Tell me how it tastes.
Good.
Is it good?
Well, we made a kid cry, so I'd say phase 1 was a success.
So, what do you think? Could you have waited for the second marshmallow? And even if marshmallows aren't your thing, which snack would have made this experiment really difficult for you? I told you the conclusions of this experiment were controversial, and let me tell you why. You see, the designers of this original study thought that they had things figured out. When a kid waited for a second marshmallow, they believed it was because that kid had greater self-control and would grow up to make better decisions and have, well, just a more successful life. But in later versions of the experiment, something important was discovered. You see, many kids in the study ate the first marshmallow, not because they were impatient, but because they didn't believe the strange adult in the room would follow through on their promise to give them a second marshmallow later. For many of the kids in the study, their decision not to wait for the second marshmallow, it wasn't based on a lack of self-control, but on a lack of trust. Has anyone ever made you a promise that you then had to wait for? Now, maybe they promised to give you something, to do something for you, to help you with something, or simply show up and spend time with you. You know, at first, the waiting is kind of fun, isn't it? Like while you wait, the anticipation builds because when the waiting is finally over, you know you're going to get the thing you've been waiting for. But what happens when that promise gets delayed and delayed again and again and again? Soon you start to wonder if it's ever going to happen at all, or if you should just give up hope. It's a feeling a lot of us can identify with, and for some of us, it's because this has been our experience with God and with Christianity. Now, if you feel like you're waiting on God right now, the good news is that you're not alone. You see, the Bible is filled with stories of people who had to wait on God for a long time. Now, if you grew up going to church, you may have heard these stories as a kid, but that doesn't mean you really know them, right? Like we often tell simplified versions of these stories to kids, but as we get older, we need to revisit these stories. The older you get, the easier it is to see these stories are more interesting, complex, and full of tension than we may have realized when we were little. You see, most biblical stories highlight the moments when characters fail and come to the end of themselves. So today, we'll see how an important biblical figure named Abram waited on God and then gave up waiting on God, and eventually learned something vital about God's character. So Abram, later he's named Abraham, is known as the father of Judaism and Christianity. He's the guy God worked with thousands of years ago in order to set a huge plan and promise in motion. So God told Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1-3, he said, look, leave your country, your family, and your father's home for a land that I will show you. I'll make you a great nation and bless you. I'll make you famous. You'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you. Those who curse you, I will curse. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. Now, Abram was an ordinary guy, but this, well, it wasn't an ordinary promise. This was a big promise for Abram. In those times, having children was seen as a sign of God's blessing. So when God promised Abram a son, it was one of the greatest promises that Abram could have ever received. This was also a big promise for the world. You see, God promised to make Abram's descendants God's special, chosen people. The people through whom God would work and be revealed in the world. But there was a problem. Abram didn't have any descendants. His wife, Sarai, was unable to have any children, and they were both pretty old. Abram and Sarai obeyed God by packing up their lives and hitting the road. But that promise about babies, that was hard for them to trust. Abram was stuck waiting to receive what God had promised. He didn't have a timeline or a plan, just a promise. He was officially waitlisted. Now, if you're in this position, you might be asking, well, what's taking so long? Did I hear God correctly? Is there something else that I need to do? Does God need my help to make this happen? Now, after waiting 10 years for a promise from a God they were still learning to trust, I'm sure Abram and Sarai felt discouraged and impatient. Discouragement can lead to doubt, and doubt can make us do questionable things sometimes, like take matters into our own hands. Now, Genesis chapter 16, verse 1-6 continues, and it says, Sarai, Abram's wife, hadn't yet produced a child. She had an Egyptian maid named Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, God has not seen fit to let me have a child. Sleep with my maid. Maybe I can get a family from her. So Abram agreed to do what Sarai said. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took her Egyptian maid, Hagar, and gave her to her husband, Abram, as a wife. Abram had been living 10 years in Canaan when this took place. So he slept with Hagar and she got pregnant. And when Hagar learned that she was pregnant, she looked down on her mistress. Sarai told Abram, look, it's all your fault that I'm suffering this abuse now. I put my maid in bed with you, and the minute she knows she's pregnant, she treats me like I'm nothing. May God decide which one of us is right. You decide, said Abram. Your maid is your business. So Sarai was abusive to Hagar, and Hagar ran away. Wow. Remember how we said the Bible tells us about people who failed in big ways and that you shouldn't necessarily imitate the actions of biblical figures, yeah, this would be one of those times. Like, we're talking disobedience, right? We're talking lack of trust, mistreating Hagar, and oh, yeah, that whole, sleeping with an enslaved woman in order to have a baby thing. See, I told you those stories are more complicated and less kid-friendly than you may have thought. But you know what? I get it. I don't know that Sarai was trying to disobey God. She probably had good intentions. She likely thought, well, I'm too old to have a baby. It doesn't make sense for God to use me. So maybe God's, he's waiting on me to come up with a different plan. Sarai may have thought that she was just helping God out, but when her plan came to fruition, it didn't only end in a baby, it ended in jealousy when Hagar became pregnant with a son named Ishmael. Sarai struggled with jealousy, and that jealousy led to her cruelty toward Hagar. Now, ultimately, Sarai's plan backfired. God had promised her tons of marshmallows, I mean descendants, but she didn't trust God would come through on that promise. Now, after 25 years of waiting for God's plan to come to pass, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, their promised son. But here's what's really amazing. God didn't only fulfill the promise made to Abram and Sarai. God even showed them grace by blessing the son Abram had fathered in disobedience. God could have punished or abandoned Abraham and Sarah, but instead, God covered them in grace. It's kind of like they ate their first marshmallow, but God gave them 2 more anyway. The Bible doesn't spell out every detail for us in this story. It leaves room for us to ask questions and to wonder. So I wonder, like those kids in the marshmallow experiment, did God understand that Abraham and Sarah's disobedience wasn't because of a lack of self-control? Did God see it was because they weren't sure if God could be trusted? Is that why God chose to show them grace instead of judgment? Because what they really needed wasn't punishment, but assurance that God could be trusted. Now, I don't know what promises you're waiting on God to fulfill right now, or which promises you'll need to wait for in the future, but here's what I do know. God can be trusted. Like Abraham and Sarah, who waited for years for God to give them a child, here's the message that you and I often need to hear. God has a plan, but we might have to wait for it. So, what are you waiting for? Discuss that in your small group tonight. What are you waiting for? Something to change in your life? Something to change in your heart? A new opportunity? A prayer to be answered? A problem to be solved? Waiting is often difficult, and it usually goes on for much longer than we'd prefer. But here's what we can learn from the story of Abraham and Sarah while we're waiting. God can be trusted. We don't have to figure it all out. God knows the future better than we do. God's plans are better than anything we can imagine. And even when we get tired of waiting, God never gets tired of being gracious and compassionate towards us. So no matter what you're waiting for, I hope this message is a reminder to you that while you wait, God can be trusted. The same God who is so patient, gracious, and trustworthy to Abraham and Sarah is patient, gracious, and trustworthy to you and to me. We won't always know why God wants us to wait or how long we'll need to continue waiting, but we know that God has a plan, even if we have to wait for it.